Okay, in this particular topic, we are going to be talking about security and security issues. Let's start off by talking about security fundamentals, and then move into threats and vulnerabilities, protection measures, and then we'll talk about workstation security. Now, most of the time when you take a new job, you are going to be required to sign something that looks like this. It's called a corporate security policy, and it will spell out in detail the policy itself, in this case nuclear plant password policy, the resources to protect, the formal policy statement, and any implementation measures that are going to be taking place in along with that particular policy. Now, if there is a violation to that policy, then what needs to be filled out is something called a security incident report. A security incident report must have several things to it. Has to be timely. In other words, if you notice a security incident, it's not okay to wait a month to report it. You need to report it right away. It'll tell you where to respond, either by phone or by email, what information is required, name, date, time, please describe the incident, did you obtain any information, and if so, if you took any action, what action did you take? So they need to be spelled out very carefully because you'll find that if you don't spell it out line by line, that sometimes somebody will find that one little loophole and try to get out from underneath any punishment or any action that is taken against them because of a violation of corporate security policy. In that corporate security policy is the principle of least privilege. Now, what we mean by that is that you only give users the minimum permissions, the minimum privileges to do their job. So, for instance, if you are a user who just does bookkeeping all day, doesn't necessarily need administrative access to the server, you don't give them administrative access to the server. The only people who should have access to that server are the people who need it to do their job. And another suggestion that is given for administrators is that they have two different accounts. They have one account, which is their standard account, which allows them to do 90% of their job, and then they have an administrative account when they need it to remote into another machine, log on to another machine. So again, even with the administrators, you're trying to limit the access to a minimum as to what they need. Some other areas where you encounter this is in access to facilities. If you work in a data center, there was both a inner door and another inner door to get into the server room. So even though you were in the operations center and you were part of the operations team, if you didn't have access to the security room, you wouldn't be able to get in. Computing hardware. We talked a little bit about this yesterday in terms of having computer locks that are on laptops, maybe physically locking up laptops in the cabinet if they're not being used. It's the same thing with your software. You might want to make sure that your original copies of the software are kept in a locked and secured area, so not just anybody can get in there and say, ooh, I only have Windows XP. I want to upgrade to Windows 7. Here's a CD, and go to it. So it's important to minimize the privileges that people have on your computer system. Another way we can do this is through what's called the use of strong passwords. Now, if you are on a domain, on a Windows domain, more than likely, not always, but more than likely, your domain administrator has already set up what is required in the use of passwords on the system. Because this is a real fine line. You're going to find if you make the policy too lenient, then people are going to go to that little minimum policy. And if you make it too strict, you're going to wind up maybe causing other security problems because people have to change their passwords so many times that they start forgetting them, say, what the heck, they'll put it on I've seen passwords on sticky notes on monitors. I've seen passwords on sticky notes in desks, even though the desk doesn't lock. So that's a major no-no. So you want to walk that fine line when it comes to strong passwords. What is a strong password? According to the rules of a Windows domain, a strong password has a minimum length of at least 8 characters, and it must have a combination of upper and lowercase characters, special characters, and numbers. It has to have 3 out of the 4 of those. So you see an example here. They've got numbers. They've got an 8. They have a pound sign for the special character, and then they both have upper and lowercase letters. So, again, like I said, you want to try to minimize that fine line between being too strict and not being strict enough with your passwords. Another way to minimize security threats is to have user education. Make sure your users understand why we have security the way it is, why we need to change passwords the way we do, why certain people only have access to a particular room. It's not to punish anybody. It's just to minimize your amount of your security footprint, so to speak. You don't want to make it so big that a lot of people can have access to things, because that, and then they'll just abuse it. All right, some common user security practices include, and we'll go through these now and then go through them a little bit more in the upcoming slides. There's social networking security, having to do with things like Facebook and other LinkedIn, those types of sites. There is system security. How are we going to secure our machines? Device security, I guess system security is more the entire system. Device security would be the individual computers. And then physical security. How do we protect the building and the facilities we have within that building? All right, when we're talking about physical security, again, we're talking about controlling access to the actual physical building that we're working in. There's no entry without a badge. So if a person doesn't have a badge, you have to have some kind of policy to cover that. The places that I've worked where we needed a badge to get in, if you forgot your badge, you got a visitor's badge for the day, which even further limited your access to what you might need for that particular day. No tailgating. In other words, if one person buzzes in, 3 more can't come in behind them. You have to buzz in the first person, let the door shut, buzz in the second person, and so forth. Challenge unknown or unidentified individuals. In other words, if you don't recognize somebody walking through the hall, go up to him, ask him, "Hi, how you doing? What's your purpose here today?" And try to find out some information about them, because, yes, maybe they do belong there. They're here to visit your boss, Joe, or they're a contractor here working on a particular project. We're going to limit access to physical resources. We talked about that a few minutes ago with the principle of least privilege. Limit the access to what they can get into. And then data handling procedures. In other words, making sure that your data is safe and secure. The one place where I worked where they had all mainframes, and I'm sure it was the same at other places as well, we had our backups were contained within a vault in the computer room, and then every week we shipped out a new set of tapes to an off-site secure area so that they weren't even on our particular building. And clean desk policies. What we're talking about here is A, just keeping your desk looking neat, or B, don't be putting your password on sticky notes and sticking it in obvious places. If your desk locks and you have sensitive material on your desk, make sure that material gets locked up at night. All right, system security. Using user IDs and passwords properly We want to comply with the company security policy. Never share a user ID or password. Confidential data should be saved to an appropriate location. And again, typically, depending on the size of the company, you might just lock it in your desk, or your company might have a vault where it goes. But the main idea here is to make sure that the information is saved to an appropriate location. Device security. Follow correct procedures for systems. Logging off, making sure you log off every night, and shut down the machines not in use. And the other thing that I've seen on a number of occasions, which I wish people would do for device security, is if you're a member of a domain, you can make sure that the last person's user ID who logged on does not appear when the next person goes to log on the machine. Because if somebody who doesn't normally use that machine comes along, they go Control-Alt-Delete to log on, or they turn the machine on, and ooh, there's somebody's user ID, already halfway to breaking into the system. Okay, wireless or mobile devices must be approved by management. That means that if you want to connect to the company network with a wireless or mobile device that does not belong to the company, make sure that you have permission to join that to the network where you are. And again, portable devices should be properly stored, secured when they're not in use. Okay? Now, obviously, if you have a company cell phone and for the purposes of being on call, and you're on call, you're going to be taking that cell phone with you. You're not going to lock it up at night. All right, social networking security. Okay. Make users aware of the threats that attack social networking applications and websites. Unfortunately, places like Facebook, LinkedIn, they do have security, but just due to the sheer number of people, sometimes things get through that shouldn't get through, and you want to make sure that you're not bringing that into the network if you're bringing like a company cell phone back or a mobile device. Security policy should dictate what sites can be used and which ones cannot. This is a big one because I've been involved in a situation where a coworker of mine was looking at websites that they shouldn't be looking at during the day, and it wound up getting him in a lot of trouble. In a teaching environment, that might be a little bit more open, but you do want to make sure that it spells out in the security policy what sites can you use, what sites can't you use. Another way we can protect our resources is through authentication. And there are several different authentication methods. One of them is username and password. I don't know of anybody that's got a job out there that is on the job and doesn't have to use a username and password to get onto the system. So every user needs a valid user ID and password. Another thing that is recommended is that when you, especially in a domain environment, when you create a new user ID and password for someone, that you check the box that forces them to change their password the first time that they log on. You want to watch for corruption of the user database. Things like users log on as one person and get connected as another person, or all of a sudden their user ID doesn't work. Things like that can indicate a problem with the user database. And make sure the last person logged onto the machine does not show the next time someone logs on. The other category of authentication methods falls under the area of biometrics. And biometrics is where we're using a physical characteristic that is unique to the individual for authentication. Thing about it is it does require very specialized hardware and software to store, access, and verify the physical characteristics of a user. So what characteristics can you have or can you use? Fingerprints. Use a fingerprint scanner. There are lots of fingerprint scanners that plug into a USB port on your machine. You can even get laptops now that have a fingerprint scanner built into the keyboard. A hand geometry scanner, which takes a look at the geometry of a user's hand. Retinal scanner, looking at the retina of a user. Voice recognition, again using voice print. Face recognition falls under the same kind of category as hand geometry. And a biometric authentication token. Now the difference between this one and all the others is that you store the info on a portable device, like a USB drive, so that that person can go from machine to machine if they need to and log on to different machines.